What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Berk, aka Dansweight here, and welcome to this very special video in which I am going to be defeating an impossible battle using cheats and hacks. And so yes, I've said it right off the bat, it's in the title of the video as well. This isn't a legitimate win, but this is a fun experimental video that I have made because I've been curious about this fight for a very long time. And thanks to the kind of modding capabilities that we have today, this is a fight that I can now experiment with and try to have some fun with and defeat for the first time, even if it isn't a legitimate win by any stretch of the imagination. So this is something that we've been working towards in the live streams that I've been doing, and if you've been following along, then you should already be up to speed with everything that's happened. But if you aren't, this video is going to also serve as a bit of a kind of all-encompassing thing to catch you up on what's been happening so far, a little bit of the history of this challenge and how it's got to the point that it's got to, and then I'll be explaining throughout the fight how it works and what this mod actually does and why it makes the impossible possible. So that's generally what to expect from here. It'll be a mix of me kind of explaining some aspects of the fight as it happens, and then we're going to have very long kind of repetitive phases where we're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And during that bit of sort of almost downtime, I'll have an opportunity to share more about the challenge itself and more about the mod and more about what's actually going on. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this one. It's going to be a long video. It's always a long fight against Penance, and especially with the conditions that I'm doing it with in this video, even with using like the speed multipliers and that kind of thing, it was basically still over 2 hours. And so there's going to be ample time for me to kind of talk about everything I want to talk about. And once this video is done, it will finally close the chapter on my Final Fantasy X No Sphere Grid adventures. So let's begin this battle, and for anyone that's going to be sort of confused about what's going on, I'm going to try my best to sort of break things down and explain why things look the way they look, and hopefully by the end of the video you should have a pretty full understanding of what's going on here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is substitute Riku in, and we are going to use a Hyper Mighty Guard straight away because that's going to give the whole party auto life, and that will set up a base from which we can then summon against Penance, because we are definitely going to need to summon. Our characters, it is impossible for them to basically survive for any length of time under normal circumstances, and even if you can survive using any kind of cheats or hacks or mods, you are simply not going to be able to do the damage that you need in order to defeat Penance. So first things first, let's summon Shiva. Now if you're wondering why Shiva, the answer is kind of twofold. The first is just because I love Shiva, she's super cool, and it's just for style points. And the second is because having an elemental Aeon for this particular purpose is going to be very useful. So you can pick Ifrit, Ixion, or Shiva as like your best options. Ifrit is the best option, but we're going to go with Shiva for this one for reasons I'll continue to explain a little later. But let's see what Shiva is actually going to do against Penance all by herself here. As you might expect, the first thing we are going to do is ensure that Shiva has a few buffs to make life a bit easier and to increase her damage output. So we're going to speed her up to get things going here. We're also going to use Protect, because the obliteration move can be reduced by Protect, and so that means just less damage for us and easier to heal back to maximum HP. And then I'm going to use 5 Cheers for good measure just to continue to reduce the damage from Penance, because if you stack Cheer 5 times, you reduce damage by about a third. So here comes the first obliteration. 10,000. So compared to Shiva's maximum HP, that's looking pretty good. Now Calamity comes in from that arm, and then Sloga comes in from the other arm. And these two moves, because you have an Aeon out there, they are largely going to be completely ineffective, because these guys have status effect immunity to almost everything. So you're going to see that she's cursed, so she can't use her overdrive, which is one thing that she will be suffering from. But in terms of the slowing ability, the armor break, mental break, power break, and magic break that Calamity can pull on you, all of that kind of stuff, Shiva is protected. And so what this means is that in this particular setup, Shiva will not be taking any kind of negative effect from the arms, and she will only be taking damage from obliteration, which is rapidly being reduced as her buffs continue to come together. And so herein already comes kind of the first part that needs to be explained, which is probably the most important part of this video. Now those of you guys that know Penance and know how it works will also know that each of these arms have an array of turns. They definitely do not use only one move. And the way that it does choose them is randomized, so there is an RNG element here. On any given turn, let's say there's a 1 in 3 chance that the left arm will use Sloga, there's a 1 in 3 chance it will use a physical attack, and there's a 1 in 3 chance it will use Terra Graviton. What this mod does is basically make sure that that 1 in 3 roll of the dice will be favorable for us every single time. And therein lies the reason why this is a completely illegitimate fight, but it's also one that allows us, for the first time basically in my kind of Final Fantasy X playing career, to be able to attempt a fight like this and just see how it would even look if you were able to somehow generate this type of RNG/luck in this fight. So the left arm can only use Sloga in this one, and the right arm can only use Calamity. And so once we have this particular setup going, it's actually way more possible than one might think to gain some momentum against Penance and eventually to be able to win. So once this has become established, you can see here that I've kind of got a bit of a loop going here. I don't have to really do too much. I can start to speed things up and just start hacking away at Penance because Shiva is not doing a lot of damage, and this first form has an auto protect, and as a result Shiva is only doing about 18 to 20,000 damage. Now, I previously mentioned that you need an Elemental Aeon to make the best of this particular fight and this particular setup, and the reason for that is they can heal themselves very quickly. You can leave your magic defense very low, like as low as possible here, and if you use the requisite element on yourself, you'll be able to heal anywhere from about 50 to 70,000 HP in a single casting. And that's just going to be far quicker than, say, Anima trying to use Curaga or trying to drain or anything like that. Now, ideally, you should use Ifrit, and this is where I will mention that the whole inspiration behind this video is from Coryphean, who is a modder who has featured prominently on this channel in the last year or so. He's a long-time viewer, but more importantly, has done a lot of great work on the modding scene for Final Fantasy X. And he basically was curious about this fight some time ago and wondered if we did have this type of kind of RNG situation, can you win the fight against Penance? Because up until today, the narrative has always been that Penance is impossible, you cannot win this fight. You would need some kind of absolutely out of this world, potentially impossible level of luck to be able to win the fight. And so it's the kind of level that it's not worth attempting. Like, the numbers are completely ridiculous, and you are completely wasting your time trying this fight. And that's why no one has really legitimately tried it for any length of time, because it is that impossible. But Coryphean said, hey, I mean, that's no fun. Why don't we actually find out what does it actually look like if you were to achieve this quote-unquote impossible RNG? And thus Coryphean created this mod in which one of the aspects that you're seeing is that the arms will only use the turns that you are seeing in this fight. Now, there's more to it, and we'll talk about it when I get to that stage. But the first stage of this mod, /hack, /cheat, /whatever you want to call it, is that the arms only use those turns that you're seeing in the video. Now, having done this, Coryphean kind of put together a little bit of a strategy /method for being able to beat Penance, and in his video, he uses Ifrit to do the job. And so part of the reason I wanted to do Shiva was because while doing my own version of it, I just wanted to do something different to what Coryphean had, so it's not a one-for-one match. And the reason he used Ifrit was because, cleverly, Ifrit has a move called Meteor Strike, and Meteor Strike will ignore the protect that Penance has. And so actually, in terms of kind of pound for pound, Meteor Strike does more damage than what Shiva's doing right here. So it's a slower move than Shiva's regular attacks, but it will do double the damage that Shiva's moves are doing. So if you want to do this kind of optimally, Coryphean's method of using Ifrit plus Meteor Strike is the best way forward. But since we have this sort of locked-in RNG anyway, where we basically can't lose, I thought let me just embellish that even more and use Shiva as a result, because it's just super cool to see kind of Shiva taking down Penance by herself. So that's generally the idea. I wanted to kind of recreate my own version of this. I tried to do it in a live stream session like the last one that I did, and unfortunately I failed because it's just like a setup /strategy that I haven't worked with before. And as you'll see later on in the video, there are some challenging aspects to it. Not super challenging, but definitely stuff where you have to remain quite focused and track the battle very closely. And especially with like the live chat and the more casual kind of live stream environment, I just wasn't able to track accurately enough, and I failed. And so I recorded this off screen just to kind of show myself that I could do it. And this is kind of the results of that. I think it took like another 2 attempts off screen, and then I managed to kind of pull it together and get the win. So yeah, Corethian is the first person to kind of upload the video on this because he created the mod, and he showed that it is possible with perfect RNG to defeat Penance in No Sphere Grid, and this is my own kind of little version of it that's going to look a little bit different to his. Not only just using Shiva for the first form, but I'm using Shiva for the entire fight, and you'll see how that differs to Corethian's a little bit later. So at this stage, I've kind of got auto battle on. Literally all I need to do is just keep track of Shiva's HP. This is where like the really grindy, repetitive aspect of the fight begins, because there's literally nothing to do. You just attack over and over and over again, and as soon as your HP gets to dangerous levels, then you just kind of heal back up. And you need to get through 3 million HP like this, and so that's why I've got the ×4 speed and the auto battle back on. So in this time, I can start to talk a little bit about kind of the history and the premise here of No Sphere Grid Penance. Now, way back in the day, when I first started the whole No Sphere Grid Dark Aeons challenge, Penance was something that wasn't really considered at all, because we had a much more important barrier before we could even fight Penance, and that was Dark Anima. And Dark Anima is, of course, its whole different story, and it's been covered to death on the channel. But long story short, I was the first person to ever defeat Dark Anima in this challenge, and that opened kind of a new frontier in terms of, well, now that Dark Anima is defeated and Penance has been unlocked, can we defeat Penance? And it was time to ask that question a little bit more seriously, because now the fight could actually be attempted. Now, even before anyone ever got to Penance, it became very, very clear just from what we know of Penance and its mechanics, and what we know of what's possible from our Aeons, that it was pretty much impossible anyway. But once I actually got to Penance the first time, I was able to spend a little bit of time kind of experimenting, checking it out. And back then, I didn't have any kind of mods at my disposal in terms of being able to manipulate how Penance behaved. So there were 2 things I couldn't do. First, I couldn't have manual control of the Magus Sisters, because my gut reaction was that surely we need the Magus Sisters to give ourselves a chance here. And if I could manually control them, then maybe, you know, with stuff like auto life and being able to select which part of Penance I hit, I might have a better chance of actually kind of getting some momentum in the fight, or even somehow trying to get a win. But of course, back in those days especially, there was no way for me to manually control the Magus Sisters, and so that already just made it basically impossible anyway. And then even if you could control the Magus Sisters manually, Penance is an absolute nightmare for trying to do in any kind of No Sphere Grid challenge, because, as we've already alluded to, Penance's arms have attacks that are incredibly problematic. So let's start with what I would consider actually probably the most problematic, and that is the right arm's ability to cast Mighty Guard. Now, Mighty Guard is absolutely horrendous because it gives Penance regen, and because he has 12 million HP, the regen is incredibly powerful. And under normal circumstances, if Penance gets this regen on it, then you'll immediately dispel it as soon as possible. Now, the problem is that the Magus Sisters, who you are going to generally need to rely on for this fight, cannot dispel Mighty Guard. And so this means that, let's say you're fighting against Penance and you have the Magus Sisters out there and Mighty Guard comes in, the only way to dispel is to dismiss the Magus Sisters and to use something like a Purifying Salt with Riku in order to be able to dispel it, or you'd need to summon a different Aeon who does have the dispel ability. And so trying to negotiate that whole thing was, again, basically impossible, because you cannot use your characters for any length of time in this fight under realistic circumstances. The reason you can't do that is because the arms are just too fast, Penance itself is too fast. Penance's move in the first form is an obliteration, which will of course kill your entire party every single time, and that means you cannot heal in between, you cannot set up like a Hyper Mighty Guard in between. There's just no time for your party to do anything in the first form. So what this means is that for the first form, you have to summon an Aeon, and they have to survive the entire first form. There's basically no other way to even start to have a chance against Penance. So you have to keep an Aeon out there, and so Mighty Guard is already a massive problem. If you want to try and use the Magus Sisters, you kind of can't, because you can't dispel and so that's not really going to work very well. Second problem is that the arms have the dispelling moves, which are very difficult to deal with, and so if you try to buff up your Aeons, for example, like I have for Shiva here, and you get hit with a dispelling slap, then you're going to lose, obviously, for example, your haste, and that's not going to be cool. You're going to lose your protect, and it's going to be a big problem for you. So that's going to be one aspect as well. Another aspect is that the left arm can use Terra Graviton, which is also a massive problem because that one does 75% of your maximum HP. And so you can imagine an Aeon that has 99,000. If it doesn't have Shell, it's going to be hitting you for 75,000 damage every single time. And so at what point are you supposed to heal from all of this damage while still making sure you can attack Penance and making any kind of headway into the fight? So all of that basically put together already paints a very impossible picture when it comes to trying to defeat Penance here. And so that's why when you are trying to build like a perfect RNG mod, part of doing that is making sure the arms don't use those slap moves, they don't use Terra Graviton, well the left arm doesn't use Terra Graviton, and the right arm also doesn't use Mighty Guard. So a lot of things already need to come together even to deal with the first form, and once we get to the second form, which should be soon now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And so now I'm going to move ahead a little bit to the start of the second form. Basically what we need to do is work down the HP as close as we can to that 9 million threshold, and once we go over, then Penance will kind of lose that lower kind of shell or whatever it is, and it will switch to the immolation phase. And so there's pros and cons of this, which we are going to discuss once the transition happens. Okay, so I'm just about ready to go here. I basically have maximum HP, I put regen on myself, and now I should be pretty much ready to go. So I'm going to shield this just to take as little damage as possible, and then we're going to push through to the second phase, where things are going to start to look very different. So the first phase is incredibly easy, like absolutely nothing that you really need to think about, just buff with haste, protect, and some cheers, and then just get going and then heal whenever necessary. But phase 2 definitely gets a lot more interesting, so let's go. Boom. Now, one good thing here is that because that kind of lower part of Penance is gone, it will actually lose its auto protect. And so Shiva's regular attacks will start to do double the damage that they were doing previously, which is going to be really nice. So, of course, the arms remain the same. They are going to be doing the same thing for the entire fight. That's basically the only way we can realistically win. And now we can start to get to work on the second part of Penance. So, obviously, we just continue to attack. That all looks the same. But now, in comes Immolation. Now, for this part of the fight, Coryphean correctly used the Magus Sisters, but for me, I'm being a bit more stubborn and doing things a bit differently and using Shiva. And I think you've already understood why you should be using the Magus Sisters for this part of the fight. Immolation only hits one character, but it removes all of your MP. And so, obviously, Shiva will need to heal in this fight. Regen is not going to be enough. And so what do you do in this situation? Now, what you should be doing, what Coryphean did for his win, was to summon the Magus Sisters, and this mod makes sure that Immolation only hits Mindy. So again, that's a big kind of RNG manipulation / cheat, but again, it's the only way to really make it work, because Mindy in that fight is not going to be using any MP, she's just going to be using Pasado over and over again. And so if she's the one that keeps losing all of her MP, it means her two sisters can retain their MP and continue to be able to heal and buff and do what is necessary to win the fight. And so that's why you should be using the Magus Sisters for this part of the fight. Now for me, I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to see, is it still possible to win this fight only using one single Aeon for the entire fight? And it turns out the answer is yes, but it comes with like a bit of a modification to kind of what Coryphean was doing in his version of the fight. So of course the situation here is twofold. One is that we don't have MP, and the second is that we are going to need to deal with Judgment Day. So let me talk about Judgment Day because it's probably going to come soon, and then we'll talk about what we did with the MP, because it should become a bit obvious once I actually put it into practice. So for those of you who do not know, Penance has a move called Judgment Day, and that move will basically do absolutely maximum damage, so like 99,999. It will take away all of your MP. It can be survived with auto life, but of course Shiva has no way of using auto life on herself. And you don't want to do it with the Mega Sisters, because if they have to take a Judgment Day, Cindy and Sandy will lose all of their MP, and that means they won't be able to do anything like, you know, auto life or full life or anything like that afterwards. So what this means is that for no Sphere Grid Penance, you cannot allow any of your Aeons to take a Judgment Day. Not Shiva, not the Mega Sisters, nobody. And so what do? The answer is that you need to track when Judgment Day is going to happen. And the way it happens is that every time Penance receives HP damage, it goes up by a point, and every time Penance uses Immolation, it goes up by another point. And you can see here I've slowed the fight down because I'm literally every single turn, every single action, I'm tracking it and I'm noting it down. And if that number reaches 19, it means the next move is going to be Judgment Day. And so at least when it comes to the second form, that's basically going to be the biggest challenge, making sure that you track Judgment Day accurately, because one slip up will cost you the entire fight basically. And you need to basically maintain that concentration for like close to 2 hours to make sure that you do not make a single Judgment Day related mistake. And so that's what I tried to do. And basically sometimes you'll see that instead of attacking, I might shield or I might do things a little bit differently. Sometimes there's like, I was stuck in between, like I wasn't absolutely sure if I tracked it correctly. And so just to kind of make sure, there were a few moves I did just to give myself the best chance of not being hit by Judgment Day, or not having my characters be hit by an Immolation before Judgment Day. So either one is basically kind of a bad outcome here. So in comes Judgment Day. This is of course a total wipeout, and this is where another factor will occur in the mod. So normally what would happen here is, let's say you don't have anything modded here, these three characters would come back, and then before you had another chance to summon, they would almost certainly be destroyed, because obviously the arms would do their thing, Immolation could hit any of them, all of that kind of stuff. It's just not really viable to ever resummon once once your party members have to return to the fray. But in this mod, the arms, once again, Calamity is not really going to affect our characters in any meaningful way here. Yes, they're going to have negative statuses, but it doesn't really matter for this context. Sloga, because we have auto haste, is also ineffective, and Immolation has been programmed to only hit Waka. And so as you might imagine, once you put these together, this means that you actually have a chance to be able to put Hyper Mighty Guard back up again and to be able to resummon your Aeon. So this is again a very heavy manipulation of the game, and there's kind of no way around it. It has to be this way, otherwise the fight is impossible. And that's why the fight basically is impossible. Trying to basically, all of the turns that you've seen here, like these are all kind of 1/3 at least rolls of the dice, and the amount of turns you've already seen here at this point, like it's already just truly an unimaginably large number to even get to this point in the fight, let alone like the 8 million damage we still have to do. So that's what I mean when I say it's impossible, because this is like a level of RNG / luck that you cannot get. It's not like it's not a 1 in a million, it's not a 1 in a billion, it's not anything like that. It's a completely different stratosphere of luck. And so that's why it's just not worth, like, it's not even worth saying that it's technically possible. It really just isn't. And so I think hopefully through this fight you're getting to see how that stuff works. But thankfully, because of the mod that we have here, we will soon be able to summon again. You can see how long this takes in real time to even summon again here. This is like everything playing out perfectly. It takes like 3 minutes to even like summon again from all of the turns and all the animations. So now what we're going to do is we are going to slide Riku's turn over here. If you look at the CTB, I'm making sure that Riku's turn comes immediately before Yuna's. And the reason I'm doing that is just to minimize the risk of any mistakes. Now, the mistake I'm talking about is where you would say dismiss Shiva or your other Aeon too quickly, and then you would have an immolation happening before Judgment Day. And the reason you don't want that is because if an immolation happens first, you'll bring them back with the Phoenix down, but then that character won't have auto life, and then Judgment Day will only you only revive 2 characters after Judgment Day instead of 3, and Penance will start to attack Yuna or Riku instead, and that's the game over. So this is why we're making sure we keep like Riku's turns and Yuna's basically stuck together, and we're making sure that Riku does the Hyper Mighty Guard immediately before Yuna summons. And so far, at least, everything looks pretty good. We managed to negotiate the first Judgment Day, and we are able to continue to attack. But again, Shiva has no MP, so what's going to happen here? That's basically one of the keys to this fight, and the way in which it differs quite largely from Corypheon's version of the win. So again, I'm not even speeding things up still here. I'm just like trying to maintain full focus, just to really like not make any mistakes. This is the phase of the fight where things basically go wrong. And as I said, all it takes is one mistake, and you're screwed. So thanks to double cast, I can always heal back like all of my HP. I can go back to 99,000 whenever I need to, as long as I have the MP. And the only thing is going to be getting MP back. Now, to kind of start to set up what's going to happen with the MP, of course, one thing you can do is to either Osmose or Lancet. And the fact that you have 3 entities to fight against, that means you have 3 banks of MP from which to pull MP back from. Now, that's good and all, but of course, as you can see from the damage that we're doing, getting like 3 kind of Osmoses or 3 Lancets and 3 sets of MP is not really going to cut it, because the problem here is that, yes, you can regain your MP, but you're going to have it immediately stripped away again, so you really don't have much chance to do much of anything. You need to get your MP back, then you need to immediately heal yourself, and then it's already gone again, because obviously Penance is too fast. And so you basically get to heal yourself effectively like 3 times using the MP that Penance and the arms have. And 3 times, given how much work we have to do, and how much damage Shiva is taking still, even though it's minimal, obviously it's adding up over time, you just do not have the MP to get through this fight in this way. And so we're going to need something a little more here. It's not going to be enough. But for now, at least, until Penance and the arms run out of MP, we're good, and we can just continue to kind of implement this strategy. And all we need to do is just pay very close attention to that Judgment Day counter and make sure that it doesn't get to 19 while Shiva is still out there. So that's going to be the key. So I've got enough HP to survive here. It's going to be like very tight, but I'm going to, I think, take a risk here. I'm trying to remember if I took the risk here or not. This is where like you have to juggle multiple things. It's like, if I want to do an Osmose or a Lancet, I'm going to need time to be able to heal myself. But if Judgment Day is too close to happening, I'm not going to have that time to heal myself. So you need to kind of keep track of your HP, you need to keep track of the MP, you need to keep track of the Judgment Day counter, and kind of find a balance between all of these things to operate safely here. So I'm just shielding here. I ultimately decide to shield. I don't want to risk kind of increasing the counter any further by attacking it. And I think after this one, I'm pretty sure that Judgment Day is going to be the next move based on the counting that I've been doing. So now I will need to heal. So you can see there I've got 3 turns. So Lancet first. This gets my MP back, and it also raises the Judgment Day counter by another point. And sometimes that's useful, like you want that to happen. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But thankfully you have 2 options. If you don't want Judgment Day to go up, use Osmose, because it only does MP damage, which doesn't increase the counter. And if you do want it to increase, then use Lancet. So now I'm able to heal, and now it's time to dismiss. So this was a pretty perfect round in that sense. I was able to heal safely and dismiss. And so now this is where you're kind of biting your fingernails to see if you got it right. If you see Immolation come in, your heart sinks. But if you see Judgment Day, you're actually quite happy, because it means you got it right. And so again, we can now kind of skip ahead to the next summon, because it's going to be the same loop once more. And as I say, this takes a long time. Eventually I started to ×4 speed. As soon as I saw Judgment Day, I just went to ×4 to speed it up. Okay, Riku gets the turn, and everything's going to kind of play out pretty much exactly the same way from this point forward, barring a few rounds that are going to be a little bit different. So let's just keep following it for now, and then we'll see what's going to happen. So the good thing about this is that eventually it does turn into more of a like predictable kind of loop, so you can track things a little bit more easily because of how the moves are playing out. So here we go again. And things are looking good. Shiva has maximum HP, she has all of her MP. Unfortunately, having all of this MP now obviously is not going to be particularly useful to us. I was dabbling with like potentially just putting a regen on while I still had MP. But I think it has pros and cons because you could just use that turn to attack instead. I think ultimately it doesn't make a huge difference, but I think it's another way you could potentially do it. So you can see now I'm starting to settle into the fight, into the second form, and on ×4 speed, I was kind of a little bit more liable to not track correctly because the animations happen really fast. So sometimes even when I'm kind of looking down at my notepad to kind of write down just like the next move, if an animation is really quick, you can just kind of miss something over the course of like 2 hours. So I stick on ×2 speed, and for the most part I was on ×2, just to obviously literally speed up the fight while not going so fast that I couldn't track it anymore. And so from here, this should be an easy round. You don't need to do anything for this one. If Shiva basically has maximum HP or very high HP, you can go through the entire round by just attacking and making sure that you track Judgment Day. So you don't need to do any kind of healing, or you don't need to replenish MP. So every time you replenish MP and you go back to full HP, you roughly get kind of 2 full rounds in between needing more MP. So 2 Judgment Days per kind of MP drain, basically. That's roughly how it seemed to be working out. Again, none of this stuff would be a factor if you're using the Maga Sisters, because basically Mindy is going to be constantly targeted. But for this one, at least, in that sense, you don't need to... Like, it's a little bit less RNG, because obviously, if you're doing a perfect RNG mod and you have the Maga Sisters, you need to mod Penance so that it attacks Mindy every time. So that's an extra 1 in 3 every single time Penance attacks. With this one, you don't need to do a 1 in 3. So, like, this one, the RNG kind of works more... like, you don't need to rely on it as much. But if you're kind of measuring it across the entire fight, because fighting with Shiva is still slower than the Maga Sisters, I think it balances out. They're both still like stupidly ridiculous RNGs either way. That's probably impossible. But it is kind of interesting that at least for this particular aspect of the fight, it's actually kind of not RNG reliant to summon Shiva when it comes to immolation. So it's kind of cool. So there comes another Judgment Day. I got it right once again. And well, I have to get it right every time because like the battle just doesn't accept any mistakes. And so here we go again. Riku gets that turn once more, like we're used to seeing. And we're going to go for another round. So everything kind of is playing out exactly the same. But you can see progress is definitely slow. 7.6 million still to go. So yeah, thankfully, I mean, the auto protector's gone, which is helping us a lot. We're obviously doubling our damage as a result. But it's still a lot of work to do. So this is the one where, again, I think it might depend slightly on like damage variance in terms of whether you need to heal again or not. It's very close to kind of that 10,000 barrier. If it does a few where it's like closer to 10,500, 11,000, then you might need to heal. But if it's sticking around like the 9,500, then you might not need to heal. So let's keep going here. Let's see how this one goes, because I still have 2 more MP opportunities available. I can take it from each of the arms one more time. So we're still looking good for now. There's basically kind of one more main element to talk about in this fight once the MP runs out from the arms. And once I kind of discuss that and show that, the rest is going to be basically kind of repeating one of 2 kind of variations of the round until we can finish things off and get the win. Okay, so we can only survive 1 more immolation after this. Let's see how I tackle it. Whenever you start to get to these stages, you can literally see me like slow down. Like kind of think about things a little bit more, double check my notes, double check everything like the HP and what's going on and like what's the best thing. Sometimes you kind of doubt yourself, even though you get into a rhythm of counting. You just think, wait a minute, did I count that right? Did I make a mistake? Did I double count that one? One thing I started to do, which I kind of wish I didn't, was that, like, right now, for example, I look at the CTB and I'm like, yeah, like Shiva has 2 turns. And then the boss turn, I would kind of do it in little chunks sometimes, where I'd be like, I just put in Shiva's turns anyway. And then once the attack animation begins for immolation, then I'd add the 3rd point, which generally I think you shouldn't do, but after a while, kind of stopping for every single Shiva turn and just like jotting it down like that was just getting really tedious. And so I started to do it more in chunks. And in general, it's faster, it works better, but it did lead to a few occasions where I was like, wait, did I kind of autopilot this and count something like too far in advance, and I counted it again? So either way, it's just kind of something you have to get used to doing and be very careful with it. And so once again, we're down to the wire here, but we have those 3 turns yet again. So now I can lancet one of the arms. And this is crucial. The fact that we get the 3 turns here is obviously what we need, because we can do this. We can heal, and then we can get out of there. And so this is what I mean, like with the non-elemental Aeon, like none of this is, you just can't do this. So the healing options just aren't there. So here we are again, and again, I'm just like, shit, did I get it right? Did I get it right? Did I get it right? Need to see Judgment Day. Yes. And after that, it's all good. So what we're going to do is we're going to move things along a little bit here. You guys have seen the main loop. And what I would do is show you what's going to happen when Penance and the arms all run out of MP. Because that's like the final bit to negotiate here. Okay, so now this is going to be the first time where Riku gets a turn after a Judgment Day and Penance has no MP left. And this is the part of the fight which I thought was really fun. And something that I've dabbled with in the past in terms of an idea is, what if I use my party members to feed MP to my Aeons? And it's a very, very niche tactic that's very rarely ever necessary. But for this particular fight, I thought to myself, well, why don't I just use Riku to toss, say, a Turbo Ether onto Penance, and that way Penance's MP will be restored, and Shiva will have a bank of MP to withdraw from again. And so this is the final kind of element of the fight, because obviously Penance will run out of MP, but if we are able to feed it more MP, then Shiva can still benefit from that. So that was like a really cool little addition, and it helped to kind of make the battle feel a little bit more collaborative, like a little bit more of a team effort between the party members and the Aeons, like the way you directly feed, well, indirectly feed MP to the Aeon. So that's basically the final part of this little strategy here. Now, the downside to this is obviously that this happens. So, for example, Yuna is ready to summon right now, but she can't because we don't have Hyper Mighty Guard. So you need to kind of check your turns a little bit here, and you need to face extra immolations in order to give yourself the time needed to toss the Turbo Ether. And so basically that's kind of all you have to do. You toss the Turbo Ether, Yuna changes weapon, and now Riku is able to prep the Hyper Mighty Guard, and Yuna can now come in and summon once again. And now this time there is another bank of MP for Penance for Shiva to drain whenever she wants. And so that's like the final aspect of this particular setup, and this is what makes it possible for a single Aeon like Shiva to be able to beat Penance by herself. So I thought that was really cool, and that's what I kind of wanted to bring to the table here in terms of something different to what's already there from what Corypheon did. This is obviously very different. For Corypheon's run, if you're using the Maga Sisters, you don't need any more MP, because Cindy and Sandy never lose theirs in that fight. And so I think like this variation was definitely cool. And so from here on, basically what I do is, as I've said, you basically get about 2 rounds worth of kind of attacking and just playing normally, and then you run out of MP, and every time that happens you're going to need to Lancet or Osmos Penance in order to get it back. And whenever Penance doesn't have MP left anymore, Riku will toss a Turbo Ether onto Penance in order to replenish its stocks. And so the final thing here, the thing where I was like, okay, this all kind of comes together quite nicely, all I need to do is just concentrate and just make sure I keep count of Judgment Day in order to not get wiped out. What is going to happen with Phoenix Downs? That was my final kind of query about all of this, because this all looks kind of pretty sound and it's working pretty well. But, of course, every single time the party faces Judgment Day, they get healed by auto life for kind of the first set, but then they have to deal with a bunch of immolations before they're allowed to summon again. And that's obviously going to add up. And you can see, like, after all of this fighting, I'm still only halfway. And so do I have enough Phoenix Downs in order to kind of see the fight through? Because Shiva's damage output is very slow, and especially on the rounds where we need to toss the Turbo Ether, we basically end up giving Shiva less time to do damage before Judgment Day, and so it diminishes our damage output a little bit as well. And so that was the biggest question, and well, there was only one way to find out. We had to literally see the fight through, because I couldn't really use Carithian's one as much of a reference, because I need to obviously have the turns where I'm tossing the turbo ethers and that kind of thing. And so in that sense, I was kind of in uncharted territory, and I really didn't know if I'd have enough to see the fight through. So that was kind of the final thing left. As long as I could keep doing this and keep focused, and I had enough Phoenix Downs, I should be able to win this fight. And so literally, as of this point, there is still basically about an hour to go in this fight, including all of the ×2 and the ×4 during the animation and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna show all of it, because I think I've shown like the general loop here. And as I say, there's basically two variations. Variation A is that Shiva has plenty of HP anyway, and she will literally just come in and attack over and over and over again, and be dismissed whenever the Judgment Day count is at 19. And variation 2 is when Riku will need to toss a Turbo Ether, and Yuna will need to change weapon, then Hyper Mighty G, then summon, then Shiva will be able to Lancet the MP back, or use Osmos, and the main thing there is kind of to do it at a safe time when she's going to get 3 turns after using it. And those 3 turns will give her enough time to drain the MP, to heal herself back up, and to dismiss if necessary, if Judgment Day has already arrived once again. So it was a case of executing that and being very careful and meticulous with all of the Judgment Day counters as I go. So I think just in order to kind of show still as much of the fight as I can, without just skipping absolutely giant chunks, I think it's a good way for me to kind of, while you're watching this stuff in the background, just kind of go back over kind of where we're at. Now that I'm at the end of this journey, when it comes to Final Fantasy X No Sphere Grid, what did we actually achieve, and what is still left on the table? So when I was coming back to this, I came from a position of having defeated all of the Dark Aeons, and not defeated Shinryu in the Monster Arena, Nemesis in the Monster Arena, and of course Penance. And so that's why my goal was to return in order to try and fight those 3. Now, what I knew was that Shinryu would basically be impossible, Penance would basically be impossible, but Nemesis would actually be rather possible indeed. And so what we did was we started things off with No Sphere Grid Shinryu, just to get an idea of what is kind of the RNG situation, and truly how impossible is it. And part of my hope with No Sphere Grid Shinryu was that maybe, just maybe, since we now have people like kind of Carithian in the community that have created mods of their own, that know the game to an incredibly deep level, that maybe we'll find some kind of crazy, wacky, kind of almost glitchy kind of strat that will allow us to beat No Sphere Grid Shinryu. Something that's never been considered before, never been tried before. But unfortunately, we did spend, I think we spent an entire session, I think it was at least about 3 hours, fighting Shinryu over and over. And during that time, we didn't really manage to come up with anything and didn't make much progress at all. And for those wondering, the reason No Sphere Grid Shinryu is so impossible is twofold. One is because it uses a move called Eraser, and Eraser is one of these very cheap moves and very rare moves the game has, in which basically whoever Eraser hits, they will be petrified and shattered, and that is guaranteed. There is no way to block it. You can't block it with like Stoneproof, you can't block it with Ribbon, you can't have Stoneproof plus Ribbon, you can try and do whatever the hell you like. If Eraser hits you, you will be removed from the fight. And unfortunately, while there's either 2 or 3 characters out there there is a 1 in 3 chance of Eraser being used. And so the threat of Eraser is huge and it's constant, and the chances of it being used over the course of what would be quite a long fight is going to be very high. So that's one of the main reasons. And the second reason is that the second move it can do out of the 3 is Shining. And Shining is another problematic move because in almost all cases, like a very high majority of the time, all 3 of your characters will be wiped out from Shining. You're just not strong enough to survive against that move. So it has an area of effect attack that can take out your entire party, and is used 1/3 of the time. It has a move that can remove a party member permanently from the fight, or 2 of them, if it uses it a second time in the fight, and there's a 1 in 3 chance of that happening, and so that already sets up a pretty bleak picture for trying to actually defeat Shinryu. Now, it has 2 million HP, which is not nice, and the final nail in the coffin really is that it counterattacks, and that counterattack will kill whoever attacked it every single time. So basically, when you put that all together, let's say you're trying to mix trio of quad 9, you mix that up, and you use an attack reels with Waka to do a massive 120,000 damage. That's great, but then afterwards, Waka will be taken out. And then if you try to use Blitz Ace, the same thing will happen. So you can do the first kind of 210,000 damage pretty effectively, but then once that happens, both Tidus and Waka have lost their trio status because they've been killed immediately afterwards. And then you need to find a window of time in order to get trio back on them. Now, during this time, obviously Shinryu's taking a bunch of turns. It might be using Eraser, might be using Shining, it might be using the Claw attack on Riku so that Riku's unable to cast trio of quad 9 again. And the fact that you need to survive for probably at least about 30 turns or so to really have a chance of making it work. Once you start doing the maths and the chances of all of those things happening, it starts to become once again that sort of impossible kind of level where you could try the fight, like everyone on the planet could try the fight every day until like for the next 100 years and probably still wouldn't do it. That's the kind of levels that we're talking. I think we did a few people in the chat kind of gave it a go. We did some like back of the napkin calculations, and I think we arrived at something like 1 in 86 octillion chance of getting that type of RNG, where basically Shinryu would never use Eraser, basically never use Shining, because so often Shining wipes out everybody that you basically need it to not use Shining either. So 30 rounds in a row where it uses the 1 in 3 opportunity, that's kind of the absolute bare minimum. And then there's further levels to that where it needs to not attack Riku at a time when Riku needs to use Trio, and then after Riku's used Trio, then it needs to attack Riku. So you put all of that stuff together, and Shinryu continues to be, unfortunately, an impossible fight by any real metric. And so we revisited it, and we kind of concluded that once again, and there were no new kind of breakthroughs in terms of that fight. And then thanks to the power, again, of like hacking and modding, we kind of did like a silly kind of experimental pseudo version where we kind of forced Shinryu to not use its problematic moves. And then, yes, of course, we were able to defeat it. So we ended up with a cheat/illegitimate win against Shinryu, and that was kind of the first chapter in our return to Final Fantasy X No Sfigrid. After that, it was actually the most fun part, I think, of this return, because I was finally able to take on No Sfigrid Nemesis. Now, Nemesis is an interesting fight because it's actually quite possible to do, and you can actually do it without resorting to any kind of crazy like hacks or cheats or anything like that. You can actually beat him legitimately within the fight. The problem with Nemesis is, of course, the fact that you can't normally unlock him because you have to beat Shinryu in the first place. And that's why back in the day, back in like 2010, 2011, when I was like fully invested and into this stuff, I basically never attempted Nemesis because I thought to myself, if I can't beat Shinryu, then what's the point? Because I can't legitimately fight Nemesis anyway, so there's kind of no point. And I didn't really have, again, like the modding tools or the know-how to try and create a Shinryu fight. And especially at that time, at least, I think I was a lot more kind of purist-minded, where like the idea of defeating Nemesis just didn't appeal to me that much, because I was like, well, you can't get to that fight anyway, so what's the point? Like, yeah, I can defeat him, but you're demonstrating something that wouldn't be possible anyway. Nowadays, I have a bit of a different mentality, just because it's just a fun fight to try. You know, it ended up being a lot of fun to attempt that, and I think the community definitely enjoyed seeing it as well. And kind of going back and actually kind of seeing how it worked out was definitely a lot of fun. And to be fair, it was a more difficult fight than I expected because once again there are kind of relatively steep, I think, RNG requirements to have the run that you need against Nemesis. So yeah, I did go back to Nemesis. We had, I think, a total of 4 live stream sessions. It was at least about 10 hours of attempts on Nemesis because you do need a decent chunk of RNG to go your way. But that's a perfect example of a fight that is definitely a bit of RNG going on there. But it's not to the extent where like the fight just becomes impossible or you shouldn't try it or it's not worth it. It might take you, if you're very lucky, you might get it done in like 2 or 3 attempts. Or if you're really unlucky, it might take you 50 to 100 attempts. But it's within that realm of RNG where definitely for basically anyone playing, you give it a go, you should be able to defeat No Spirit with Nemesis because the Mega Sisters are incredibly powerful. And once they get going with like their haste and their buffs, and Mindy's Passado does an incredible amount of damage because Nemesis's defenses aren't like insanely high in the same way that say Penance's is, you can really do a lot of damage very quickly. Like, put it this way, if you haven't seen the sessions and you didn't watch the winning attempt, which I definitely recommend you should, the winning attempt is relatively short. I think it's about a 20-minute video or something. Definitely give it a watch. But put it this way, Mindy's Passado does about 450,000 damage to Nemesis every time you use it. And so even though Nemesis has 10 million HP, if you can do 450,000 in a move that you can do relatively regularly, especially when hasted up, then you can start to see how you can really burn through Nemesis' HP pretty fast. Now, that same thing doesn't really apply to Penance because its stats are better than Nemesis's, and Passado does way less damage than it would do to Nemesis. But for us at least, thankfully, it does do a lot of damage against Nemesis, and after about 10 hours or so of attempts, I managed to get the win, and I had a legitimate win against Nemesis, against No Figure Nemesis for the first ever time. So that was super cool. Again, overall, it's not legitimate because you can't unlock the fight, but in terms of once you actually step into the fight, everything that happened within there, in that sense, was legitimate and can be kind of replicated by anyone who comes in with the same stats and the same setup. So that was really cool, and it was really nice to kind of have that battle done because it's one that I basically kind of gave up on and wasn't as interested in all those years ago. But I could finally kind of come back to it and have some fun with it and enjoy a win with a live audience. So that was a really good time. So that was kind of phase 2. And then that brings us all the way back to phase 3 where we are at right now. And as you're seeing, I mean, it's taken a mod that has really, really severely kind of crippled Penance. In that sense, it's kind of like technically it has all of the moves, but it's not using them. So it's as good as saying like those moves don't exist for it. You know what I mean? Like if the fight plays out like this, it's as good as saying like those extra like 5 moves or whatever, 4 moves don't exist for Penance's arms. But this is why like this level of RNG, like look at how long this fight is and look at how many times the dice has been rolled here. Like the amount of times that you would have to kind of have the right thing happen, it's hundreds and hundreds of moves here. And so that's why like I think if Nose-Figured Shinryu was like a 1/3 chance happening 30 times in a row as an absolute bare minimum level of luck, this is like a 1 in 3 chance happening, I don't know, 300 times in a row or something, or even worse than that. And so once you start to think of it in those terms, you can really start to see how kind of stupidly impossible it starts to become. I think one element that's also worth talking about here is that Karifian himself mentioned that so far up until this point, I've been calling this fight kind of realistically impossible, but as you've seen with like a perfect RNG mod, it in that sense at least, it is possible to do, but impossible to replicate under any real kind of circumstances. Now, Karifian himself actually went one step further and said that it might actually be the case that even this kind of perfect RNG that you see here might not be possible in the game. Now, this is way beyond my scope of understanding to properly explain why this is the case. Karifian did his best to kind of give me an idea and to try and break down some aspect of why that's the case. And what I'll do is I'll generally kind of paraphrase a message that he shared with me about, for example, like how the targeting RNG works. Because there's multiple different types, like in terms of what move is chosen to be used, and then there's also who the move hits. and both of those things need to happen in abundance for a strategy like this to work. But in terms of like who, for example, Immolation will target, Karifian gave me a little bit of a breakdown and like a bit of an idea of how that works and why it might be possibly the case that even though we have this kind of setup here, the game itself, like the kind of the zeros and ones and the code inside the game and what the game does, might not be able to reproduce these circumstances even with kind of all of the RNG potential that the game has to offer. And so this is a little bit of an explanation as to why that might be the case. And so I'm basically going to paraphrase from a very long message that Karifian sent me about the way RNG works. So what he said here is the way that the RNG string works is that you take the numbers from 0 to 65,535 and then shuffle them randomly. So now you have all of those numbers that could be in any kind of arbitrary kind of order. Then, he says, when the game needs a random targeting, it pulls the first number from this list. If it's divisible by 3 with no remainder, the move targets Yuna. If it has a remainder of 1, the move targets Waka. If it has a remainder of 2, the move targets Riku, something like that. So what we need in order to make my strategy, for instance, work is that we need basically all the immolations to go onto the right target. So if we ignore the existence of Calamity for now, after Judgment Day, we need the next 4 numbers in this list to all have a remainder of 1 when divided by 3. Then we get to Summon, and 3 more immolations happen before the next Judgment Day, so the 3 numbers after the 4 may not be that critical, but after that, we need the next 4 numbers in list to all have a remainder of 1 when divided by 3, and this needs to happen like 10 times in a row. So you can shuffle the numbers from 1 to 65,535 in many different ways, no doubt, but depending on how the game calculates its RNG strings, it's entirely possible that none of them fulfill that condition, that Waka gets targeted that often again and again and again. And so that's kind of one way to start to try and understand a little bit of how the RNG could work, and a little bit of context for why Karifian says maybe this is so kind of outlandishly unlikely in terms of the RNG that maybe the game can't even generate the numbers needed to kind of create an RNG string like this one. And so basically that's why it might be still could potentially be fair to call this completely impossible. Even with what you're seeing here in terms of the perfect RNG mod, maybe this mod is just not even possible to be done by the game, and therefore it is well and truly impossible. And so it's in a very interesting place, and that's why it's still very fun to be able to even try something like this, because obviously there's normally, like back in the day, like in the PS2 or any of that kind of stuff, there's basically no way that you could even try a fight like this. And so the fact that we have these tools available to just really like dig in and just to experiment with different strategies and ideas and have some fun with these fights is definitely super cool, and it's really nice that I got to try this. So that's where we have to end our No Sphere Grid journey. We kind of have to accept the fact that both for No Sphere Grid Shinryu and No Sphere Grid Nemesis, we will never basically be able to find a way past them, because we will never be able to have the type of RNG that is necessary to defeat them. And so that's just how it is. And so if in the future anyone ever kind of shows you a fight, let's say they show you like a No Sphere Grid Shinryu, or they show you a No Sphere Grid Penance or something like that, it has to pass multiple, I would say, like multiple stringent kind of checks to somehow kind of convince people that know the challenge and the game very well, like let's say me and Karifian, that this was done completely legitimately and that this was truly RNG. I don't even know how, because it's so difficult to prove that you haven't actually manipulated the game kind of behind the scenes. It's to the extent where the numbers are just so absolutely ridiculous and insane that I don't think I could ever watch a No Sphere Grid Shinryu video or a Penance video and be convinced that this was just true RNG and that some absolute insane miracle happened to these people who did this particular kind of run. Now, what could happen is that still, I mean, the door is open. It will forever remain open for someone to come up with something that hasn't been thought of, hasn't been considered, that makes these fights orders of magnitude more possible. So you bring down that sort of 86 octillion to 1 in a million, and then you start to say, okay, you know, 1 in a million, it's, you know, 1 in a million things happen all over the world all the time, really. And so you can start to kind of believe. But 1 in 86 octillion things don't really tend to happen very often. And so if anyone ever comes up with like a different idea for these, like something like a strategy, or even some kind of, you find some kind of bug, like a repeatable, exploitable glitch or bug or something like that, I'm always kind of open to hearing that and to seeing if anyone's come up with something. But it's been so long now since these challenges have existed, and some of like the greatest minds of Final Fantasy X, people like Carithian, who know these games inside out and that know the mechanics down to a T. They know what every boss can do. They know what every enemy can do. They know, you know, how RNG works. They can manipulate the game at their will. If these kinds of people are looking at these fights and saying that there's no way to do it other than these kind of insane restrictions that are not kind of repeatable, then I think it's very fair to say that it will remain that way basically forever. But who knows? Maybe the true miracle would be someone coming up with a strategy that we never considered to kind of look at this in a whole different way and maybe find a way to kind of make it happen. But for now, at least, this is the way it is, and it will remain so. And I'm very happy at this stage to kind of end my no sphere grid Final Fantasy journey. In terms of, like, say, you know, the Dark Aeons, Penance, Nemesis, Shinri, all of that stuff, I do not see myself kind of going back to those fights ever again. The Dark Animal one, obviously, because it's like a singularly special fight on the channel. Who knows, like that one. It's one of those where, like, now and then just going back and re-experiencing it again to some degree is kind of fun. But in terms of the other fights, unless there's some type of innovation that's never happened before, in terms of like an idea, a strategy, or a bug, or a glitch, or something, I don't see myself kind of coming back to those. And I'll keep my focus on like other challenges, other ideas for the future. But it has been a lot of fun to come back to it. Definitely enjoyed it, and especially in the live stream format, there's certain things that maybe I wouldn't do on my own, but the fact that it's kind of a live stream makes me more motivated to do it. And this was one of those things. And so thank you to everybody that tuned in and supported the live streams for this kind of No Sphere Grid Revenge Tour. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot more adventures together in the future in the live streams. The next one coming up is going to be, I think, a very interesting one, where I've long wondered, ever since I started watching more like Elden Ring type challenges, where they do like wacky stuff like Elden Ring, but every enemy is twice as fast. So like your dodging windows and stuff are like half as small. I was like, okay, Final Fantasy X is not that kind of game, but we all know how powerful haste is in this game. What if every enemy was twice as fast? Like, what if every enemy had auto haste? And how would that work? Like, how much more difficult does the game become when that's the case? And so that's a question that I asked, and nowadays, again, we have the modding tools to make those things happen. And so the next set of live streams, if you ever manage to catch one, will be me trying to defeat the game with every enemy, like all of the random encounters, all of the bosses, all the Dark Aeons, all of those guys, all having auto haste. So we'll see how that works. But for now, at least, at this stage, I think I've said everything that I can say about this challenge. And there's still, by my kind of count, there's at least about half an hour still to go in the video. So I will start to skip ahead right towards the end, and we'll kind of commentate through the final sort of few minutes, and we will wrap this video up. Okay, so it has been many, many rounds since we last spoke. Now, the big question here is, how are we doing in terms of Phoenix Downs? And the answer is that we have 9 Phoenix Downs left. 9. So it was really close. It was pretty down to the wire here. Now, 356,000 HP left for Penance. This should be enough. I was also keeping account of how much damage I was doing per round, and it was ranging from 350 to 450,000 per round, depending if I needed to toss an ether or not. So this should be enough. It was close to kind of being on the edge, but even if it wasn't, we just about had one more round's worth of Phoenix Downs to then to resummon. But this was very, very close. I think in terms of like how efficient I was with Shiva and how much damage I did like per unit of time, I think if you do this with like Ifrit, I think you end up having maybe a little bit more headroom. And if you do it with the Maga Sisters, as Carithian showed anyway, you definitely have a lot more Phoenix Downs to play with. But it is still doable with Shiva as well, which is super cool. So this is me summoning Shiva for the last time in this fight. And still, to me, the fact that Shiva basically single-handedly took down Penance is badass. Like, yes, there's a big asterisk and you can put a bunch of notes alongside it. But still, just like the core premise of her being able to do that, I think is really cool. considering the only other version of this fight that exists on YouTube right now is like the Maga Sisters trio taking on Penance. I think this is really cool. And I was very relieved that I had enough Phoenix Downs left. It would have been a real bummer if I got to like the last million or something and I ran out of Phoenix Downs, because I'd be like, I think there was maybe, if I had to total it, let's just say maybe 5 or 6 turns that I, out of fear of doing something wrong, I didn't attack. But even 6 turns, it's maybe about 240, 250,000 damage. And so if I had, say, like 800,000 left, and I ran out of Phoenix Downs, then it basically, I think it would have meant that the strategy kind of doesn't work. And so that would have been a bit sad, because I would have fought for a very long time, only to realize that I don't have enough. Mega Phoenixes, I'm not sure they would have done the job there. And so, yeah, it would have been a real shame. But thankfully, we just about had enough. And so the underpowered Shiva is going to be able to slay the mighty Penance. For anyone who doesn't know, Shiva is underpowered because both her and Valifor have weaker normal attacks than the rest of the Aeons. So for example, Ifrit, his attack power is 16, but Shiva's is only 14, and so therefore she will do less damage than Ifrit does on a normal attack. And so I think a lot of people don't know that, and in general, like, you won't really notice it too much, it won't matter, but yeah, Shiva is weaker than like Ifrit, Ixion, Bahamut. Even if they all have the same stats, if they're 255 strength, Shiva will do less damage when she does a regular attack, unfortunately. So that's another reason why like the fight went on a little bit longer. I think that's why I think like Ifrit would give you that headroom that you need to make the fight even safer. But regardless of all that, we got it done, and we are 1 hit away. Based on random variance, we might not get it done in this one, but if we do a Heavenly Strike, then we can guarantee the win, because Heavenly Strike does do 16 attack power. And there you go. Shiva has defeated Penance. Almost single-handedly, but she couldn't do it without the help of the party members, who obviously took care of Judgment Day, and also Riku, who tossed the Turbo Ethers to continue to feed her MP throughout the fight. So it was definitely a group effort, but in terms of doing literally all of the 12 million damage, it was basically Shiva that did the entire job. And so I think that's super cool. And there we have it. GG. So yeah, I'm going to wrap up this video here. Thank you all so much for watching. This is going to probably take the place of the live stream slot for that particular week, because I need to kind of put a few things together before I'm fully ready to launch with the Auto Haste mod. And so this will be kind of like, hopefully, some of the usual suspects that people that have been watching the streams can tune in. I'll do this as like a premiere, just so that we can kind of hang out and enjoy that. But yeah, 7 Phoenix Downs left there, just about got it done. And so yeah, we are going to wrap this up here, and I will be back next week, where we will begin the Final Fantasy X, but all enemies have Auto Haste challenge. It should be a wacky one. Looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll have a good time. Maybe, who the hell knows, maybe I start in no sphere grid and we see how far we go in no sphere grid, but all enemies have Auto Haste. It's going to be a wild one, and you should be there to enjoy it. So thank you all for watching. I will see you soon. Take care.